There's a moment in House of the Dragon Season 3 that feels small, almost easy to miss if you're not paying close attention. A single word choice, really. But if you know where this story is heading, that one word is a warning shot, fired across the entire back half of the war. A queen who fought a war on behalf of legitimacy, her own legitimacy. Just looked the man who made that war possible in the eyes, and denied his sons the exact thing she once demanded for herself. That queen is Rhaenyra Targaryen. And what she does to Corlys Velaryon's two bastard sons, Adam and Alan of Hull, might be the clearest sign yet that the crown is changing her into someone her father never wanted her to become. If you've been watching this season, you already know Rhaenyra's grip on King's Landing is shakier than it looks. Empty coffers. A starving city. The High Septon who won't anoint her. Visions of her dead son haunting the halls of the Red Keep. The whole apparatus of her rule feels like it's being held together with tape and desperation. But underneath all of that political chaos, it's a quieter, more personal betrayal. One that doesn't make the headlines inside the show's own world, but that could unravel alliances she desperately needs to survive what's coming. So let's talk about what actually happened. Why Rhaenyra made the choice she made, why the show chose to show it to us in exactly this way, and why it might be one of the most consequential decisions of her entire reign, even though, on the surface, it looks like the smallest one. The debt being called in. Here's the setup for anyone who needs the refresher. Corlys Velaryon, Lord of the Tides, has spent decades as Rhaenyra's staunchest ally. Long before the war, long before dragons started dying over Rook's Rest in the Gullet, Corlys was already tangled up in her fate. When her own legitimacy was questioned, when half of Westeros whispered that her sons Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey weren't really Rhaenyra Velaryon's children, but the product of her affair with Harwin Strong, Corlys didn't flinch. He knew the truth. He knew his grandsons, by blood, weren't his grandsons at all. Everyone at court suspected it. The resemblance to Harwin Strong was hardly subtle. And yet Corlys named Lucerys his heir anyway. He stood beside Rhaenyra publicly, defending her family's legitimacy even as it fractured his own house's bloodline, and made him complicit in a lie the entire realm could see through. That loyalty cost him more than pride. His wife, Rhaenys, died fighting for Rhaenyra's cause, burned alongside Meleys in a battle she didn't have to enter. His castle burned. His prized ship, the one he built his entire identity and fortune around, sank to the bottom of the sea. Corlys gave Rhaenyra his family, his fleet, and his name. He absorbed the scandal so she wouldn't have to carry it alone. So when Corlys finally asks Rhaenyra for one thing in return, recognition of his two bastard sons, Adam and Aelin, as true Velaryons, with Aelin named his heir, it doesn't seem like an unreasonable request. It seems like the bare minimum. A debt finally being called in, and a small one at that, compared to everything he's already given up, and Rhaenyra says no. The downgrade hidden in a title, not outright at first. So that's what makes it so uncomfortable to watch. She hedges. She lets the refusal happen sideways, through ceremony rather than confrontation, which somehow makes it worse. When she knights the dragon seeds who claimed dragons during the war, men and women who, against every odd, managed to bond with masterless dragons and turn themselves into weapons of the crown overnight, she styles Adam not as Adam Velaryon, but as Adam of Hull. A subtle downgrade. No trumpets, no announcement, no confrontation in front of the court. Just a name, spoken slightly differently than it should have been, in front of everyone who matters. Corlys catches it immediately. Of course he does. He spent his entire life understanding exactly what names mean in this world, what they open and what they close. A name is currency in Westeros. It's inheritance, legal standing, the difference between a lord and a laborer. Rhaenyra didn't need to raise her voice or issue a decree to deliver the blow. She just needed to withhold 2 syllables. When he confronts her about it, Rhaenyra's justification is that her own family's legitimacy is still too fragile a subject. Naming more bastards as trueborn heirs, she argues, invites exactly the kind of scrutiny she can't survive right now. Every eye in the realm is already looking for cracks in her claim. Why hand them a fresh one, wrapped in someone else's name? On paper, that's a defensible political calculation, and the show is careful not to make her seem cartoonishly cruel about it. Joffrey is her heir now, and Joffrey's parentage is arguably the shakiest of all her children's. The boy whose paternity was never even seriously debated as anything other than obvious to those paying attention. Every time someone questions whose blood runs in a Velaryon bastard, it's one more reminder that the same question could be asked of the Targaryen throne itself. Rhaenyra isn't just protecting Corlys' sons from scrutiny, she's protecting herself from it. The two situations mirror each other so closely that resolving one risks illuminating the other. Loyalty without conditions versus loyalty with an asterisk. But here's why this decision cuts so deep, and why it says so much about who Rhaenyra is becoming. Corlys never asked for proof before he accepted Lucerys. He never demanded assurances, never hesitated, never made Rhaenyra's family answer for a truth everyone already suspected. He simply chose loyalty over doubt, in public, at a moment when doing so was dangerous and costly, and offered him nothing in return except the goodwill of a queen, who might not even survive her own claim to the throne. Rhaenyra is now doing the opposite. She has the power to erase any doubt around Adam and Alan with a single decree. A queen's word is law in exactly this kind of situation. That's the entire point of the institution she's fighting to preserve. And she chooses not to use that power because doing so is politically inconvenient for her at this particular moment, given her particular set of problems. It's worth pausing here to ask, is this really about protecting the crown? Or is this about Rhaenyra protecting only what protects her? Because those aren't the same thing. And the difference matters enormously for everyone around her, for Corlys, for Adam and Aelin, and eventually for every other ally who's watching how she treats the people who've bled for her. Why Adam and Alan aren't a footnote. This single scene also plants the seeds for something much bigger, and it's worth explaining why these two characters in particular carry so much weight going forward. Adam and Aelin aren't minor characters, even though the show initially introduces them as little more than shipwrights working the docks at Hull. They're dragon seeds, men of Velaryon blood, however illegitimate, who answered Rhaenyra's call when she needed riders for the masterless dragons roosting at Dragonstone. Claiming a wild dragon is not a small feat. Plenty of dragon seeds who tried it that season didn't survive the attempt. Adam succeeded, bonding with Seasmoke, the dragon that once belonged to Rhaenyra Velaryon himself, a detail thick with irony, given that Seasmoke's former rider was the man whose name Rhaenyra's own children borrowed under false pretenses. Aelin's story runs in a similar vein, eventually connecting him to one of the most powerful dragons in Westeros. These aren't background players who happen to share a surname with a prominent lord. They're proven assets in a war that Rhaenyra cannot win without dragons and the people willing to ride them. Whether Rhaenyra treats them as trusted allies or convenient tools could determine which side they ultimately choose to fight for when the war reignites, as it inevitably will, given how thin the current peace already is. What the history books already know, and based on the source material this show is adapting, the accounts collected in Fire and Blood, this mistrust doesn't heal on its own. It festers. In the history this series draws from, Rhaenyra's relationship with Corlys continues to deteriorate as the war goes on, especially after other dragon seeds. Men she elevated and trusted with dragons of their own betray her at the worst possible moment, defecting or turning against her cause entirely. The show hasn't invented this tension out of nowhere. It's accelerating a fracture that was always coming, just moving it earlier in the timeline and making it far more personal than the history books ever bothered to. Where the source material treats this largely as political maneuvering and after-the-fact rationalization, the show gives us the human moment underneath it. A queen who owes a man everything, choosing not to pay a debt she absolutely could afford. That's a deliberate choice by the writers, and it changes how we're meant to read everything that follows. It's no longer just Rhaenyra made a political calculation that later backfired. It's Rhaenyra looked her most loyal ally in the eye and chose herself, and we watched her do it. The question worth sitting with, which raises the bigger question worth sitting with as the season continues. If Rhaenyra can't extend the loyalty Corlys showed her, even now, while she desperately needs every ally she can get, what does that tell us about how she'll treat the rest of her allies once the crown truly starts pressing down on her? Because a queen who withholds trust out of fear tends to create the very enemies she was trying to avoid. Fear is rarely a one-way transaction. The people she disappoints today are the people she'll need tomorrow, and they will remember exactly how she treated them when it cost her nothing to do better. There's also something quietly tragic in the framing of this scene, and it's worth sitting with the tragedy rather than rushing past it. Corlys isn't wrong when he throws it back in her face, reminding her, bluntly, that her own sons lived and died carrying the same label she now refuses to remove from his. Jacaerys and Lucerys were called bastards their entire lives, in whispers and an open insult, and it never stopped costing them. Now Rhaenyra sits in a position to spare 2 other young men from that exact fate, and she declines, for reasons that would have sounded intolerable coming from anyone else during her own fight for legitimacy. It's not a comfortable comparison for Rhaenyra to sit with, and the show seems to want us to feel that discomfort right alongside her. She built her claim to the throne on the idea that blood shouldn't be the only thing that defines legitimacy, that a name given can matter as much as a name inherited. And yet, faced with the chance to extend that same grace to someone else, when it cost her nothing but a moment of political vulnerability, she chooses political caution over principle. Power. One small decision at a time. So here's the real takeaway from this moment. The one worth carrying into every episode still to come. Power doesn't just test what people are willing to fight for. It tests what they're willing to sacrifice once they actually have it in hand. Rhaenyra fought a war partly to prove that a bastard-born accusation shouldn't cost her sons their birthright, their titles, their place in the world. Now that she sits on the throne she paid so dearly for, she's making the exact calculation she once resented being made against her own family. The crown isn't corrupting her all at once, in some dramatic, unmistakable turn. It's doing it one small, understandable, defensible decision at a time. A name withheld here. A hedge there. Nothing that looks like villainy in the moment, and that's exactly what makes it so unsettling to watch. Tyranny rarely announces itself. It just keeps making reasonable-sounding choices, until one day the person making them doesn't recognize the throne of principles they started with. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Was Rhaenyra's refusal a necessary act of political survival, or is it the first real proof that power is turning her into the very thing she once fought against? Drop your take in the comments. I'd genuinely love to hear how you're reading this shift in her character, and whether you think Corlys forgives her before this war is through. If this breakdown helped you catch something you missed, do me a favor and hit like, subscribe, and share it with a fellow House of the Dragon fan. There's a lot more hiding beneath the surface of this season, and I'll see you in the next one.